Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. By this point, I am sure you guys know how much I love regenerative agriculture and the concept of being a good steward to the planet. This being said, one of the main reasons I love this field so much is due to its implications upon what it means to be a good steward of the earth on a spiritual level. The truth is that we are the earth, and the earth is us. And as such, how we treat the external world around us is merely a reflection of how we treat ourselves internally. And throughout my life, almost nothing has taught me more about myself than working the land, and doing so in a way that leaves a more beautiful world for generations to come. I think many of us who find love in psychedelic medicines naturally gravitate towards taking better care of the earth around us, and today's guest on the show fits that bill to a T. Now, he's a returning guest and someone I had a lot of amazing feedback from all of you on after our first podcast, and is a man who has spent the last couple of decades focusing upon living his life in a regenerative way, including creating the first clean, green, certified cannabis farm on the legal market today in the U.S. And in this episode, we dive into many different topics on this subject and more. So make sure to get yourself settled in and ready as I welcome my brother, JR the Bear Hendry, back to the show. JR, my man, dude, am I excited to be back on this show with you. You know, the first show we did got so many good positive feedbacks. You know, so many people reached out saying, wow, I learned a lot from that episode. Who is this guy? And so I'm really excited to have you back on because it's very rare that I find someone who lines up with so many of the values I have within my own viewpoint around not just cannabis, but lifestyle as a whole, you know, agriculture, how to leave the Garden of Earth greener than when we found it, and all the things that we talked about in the last episode. And like I said in the intro to everyone, you know, JR and I have a couple things we're going to talk about today. And other than that, we're going to let the divine take us wherever it may take us. So first of all, man, how are you doing today? For anyone who's listening in audio, you know, I see the beautiful sky behind JR. I imagine you're on your farm right now. I can hear the roosters clucking. So how's life going for you, man? It seems peaceful AF over there.
It is, brother. It's a beautiful morning, and it's just beautiful weather here in the mountains of southeastern Oklahoma. We've finally got rain in the forecast. We've gone like 120, 140 days without rain. I believe the longest dry spell in Oklahoma recorded history. And so it was some of the best news this morning. My wife was like, check out the forecast. You know, there's 5 days of rain coming soon. And you can already feel the earth reaching for it. Like you can smell it, even though it's a couple days off. I swear you can smell it. So it's a happy day on the farm. And yeah, you'll definitely hear the rooster at some point. We've got free ranging chickens rolling around. He'll want to interject his opinion. But yeah, man, welcome to Blue Star Farms.
Oh, dude, I'm so excited for the day I get to come down and see it in person, man, and hang out with you. And, you know, it's really cool, too, because, you know, when you live farm life, you know, when you do it I'm not going to say the right way. I'm not going to put duality into this conversation. But when you do it in the way that both of us are in alignment with, right, when you're not trying to screw with shit or manufacture things to happen, you know, you are going by the elements, right? Whatever the world wants to do, you know, is what you're going to experience. And I'm curious for you, like, just out of personal curiosity, like when there is a drought like that or a dry spell, are there any things that you could utilize as a regenerative farmer that could support, you know, more water getting into the right places? Or is it just a waiting game? You know, is there anything that you do in terms of techniques that you would do or have been doing when those kind of things happen?
Absolutely, there is. You know, the first step, you know, in answering that would be making sure that the right things are in place for proper water conservation to start with, right? And a lot of that has to do with natural and indigenous plants and grasses. On this farm here in particular, one thing that we've really showcased well in the little over 3 years that we've been here We're not too far from a river. We are in a river bottom here. Over my left shoulder is a pretty good mountain range for Oklahoma anyway. And over my right is only about 300 yards to the river, 400 yards to the river. And this little valley here, the farm, was prone to flooding when we got it. But I would say prone to flooding because of how it was being taken care of. It looked like a golf course behind me. Everything was mowed. It looked like a subdivision lawn, right? And in doing that, the grasses didn't have their natural cycles ability to really go deep with their roots. And if that doesn't happen, then soil gets compacted, water just runs off. So I'm making a habit of, if the field is not in cultivation, and we're very careful not to do that intentionally, at least 30-40% of our farm is always in a native state. And even then, like we'll only brush hog those grasses maybe once a year, sometimes every year and a half. And so we're letting those natural grasses, natural plants do their thing, and it doesn't flood anymore. And so that's the first step, is things like that are conservation. The right mulch goes a long ways. Soil fertility goes a long way for holding moisture, right? And so there's those steps, and then there's the weird steps. We'll call it, right. There's definitely what folks would call old wives' tales, or traditional things that you can do to bring in the rain. Hugh Courtney, a leader in biodynamic agriculture, specifically had some preparation concoctions that he downloaded that revolve around that. And so, of course, when you come into a drought time, we pull out all the tools in the toolbox to attempt to have an effect there. But I would say that the number one thing to start with there is, were you doing the right things in the first place to make use of what you have, right? And I think that's just a solid principle in life in general, right? Before we go reaching for more, are we properly managing what we currently have?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, man. One thing you mentioned that a lot of people may not be aware of within regenerative agriculture is that, I think a lot of people are not even aware of what big ag is doing overall. So they don't even have a context of how this is different, but maybe you can explain that too when I ask you this next question. But you mentioned that 30-40% of your land is in kind of a rest period at one time, and I know, being a regenerative farmer myself, that is extremely important, right? To bring back all the microbe life, and to also just give the land time to actually take a break in between putting harvest on it, putting harvest on it, and putting harvest on it. Whereas big ag doesn't really do that in the same way. Could you explain what resting land does overall, and some of the complications that come along with when people don't do that, right? When big ag is just kind of pushing the land over and over again, and they're also killing off everything, and a lot of other things we could talk about too. But, what are the main benefits of resting land in between harvests? And, what are some of the complications associated with not doing that?
I'll answer that with two separate buckets. The first bucket that we're going to fill there in answering that would be the physiological, modern, scientific way to answer that, which would be physically, scientifically, microbiologically. What it's doing is, there's not a high nutritive demand. Your native grasses, your native plants, in that natural state, there's a very well balanced nutrient cycle, right? A particular grass needs a particular set of micro and macronutrients to be itself. And then at the end of the season, when it returns to the soil, right, it pulled things out of the soil, and now it's at the top, and now it's going to get broke down again. And so it's literally, it's mining a nutrient from down deep where its roots are. Then it becomes into the grass body. Then the grass body decomposes on top of the soil. And so it's literally a cycle of depth in how the nutrients flow. And so, nature is very intelligent. So the right grass that particular patch of soil needs for what it considers balance or homeostasis in that nutrient cycle, it'll be there, right? Like a lot of times, weeds, for example, what we call weeds in our culture, those are the greatest indicators of what's going on in a soil. A really good biodynamic farmer specifically won't even need a soil test on a piece of land. You can tell by what plants are growing there exactly what the micro and macro nutrient levels are, because those plants are indicators. They're telling us what's going on. And so that would be the first bucket, right? Is in leaving land in its natural state, we are allowing nature's intelligences to nutrient cycle in the way that nature knows best, right? Then there's the corresponding etherical or spiritual side of it. And I think all of us, especially your intelligent and tapped in listeners, are going to understand the benefit of rest, right? Or integration, is another way of looking at it, right? If it's all work all time, then there's not a season for the rest that's needed to make proper growth. There's not a season to integrate what's been learned. Those same type of spiritual principles that we're learning in our human bodies, we are nature. We don't have one set of rules and the rest of nature has another. And so those same principles apply to the land. We have to allow space for that rest, that breathing, and just given that space, right? I mean, I think we can all relate to that of, you need to step back. It's me time, right? And there's a certain breath that happens there that just isn't allowed to be in any other setting.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And dude, I'm so grateful that I have you as a buddy in this lifetime, because you got exactly the next question I was going to ask, which is how does that physiological aspect apply to the spirituality and also like our lives as a whole? And what immediately came through for me as I was thinking about that question, and then you just said it without me even having to say anything, was the idea that like we can tell a lot about how we're treating ourselves through how we're treating anything else. And so if we just look at agriculture in general, right? What do we see there? We see them really pushing the land, not giving it time to integrate. And when we look at human beings overall, and we look at rising rates of depression and anxiety and all of these things, these are very similar to certain types of weeds approaching our land that are dangerous, that are showing us, hey, this land needs rest, right? Maybe there's diseases going on and things of that nature. And so what do human beings do when that happens? Oh, you just have a Zoloft deficiency. You just have a Prozac deficiency. Oh, you have a XYZ deficiency. Instead of realizing that we've been entered into a world where the powers that shouldn't be, whoever they are, and whether or not they're human beings or lizard beings, they've pushed us into a certain lifestyle that all of us think is quote unquote normal, which doesn't really allow any time for ourselves. I mean, think about it, right? We get weekends, which if for most people, if they're able to get a full weekend, is 2 days. And in that time, they have to take care of the entire rest of their life. When you couple onto that, destroying the nuclear family, when you couple into that, the whole idea that most people are making less money than they already need, then they're probably going to be working a second job on the weekends, right? And so you start to see a really interesting correlation between all of these illnesses going up as, in my opinion, human beings get farther and farther from our true nature and what is true to us, I mean, again, at the end of the day, we are human beings, not human doings, right? But I think our actions speak otherwise. I think most of us, myself included for many years, think of ourselves as a human doing. And when we look at kind of the unspoken core values of Western countries anyway, I won't say the whole world, but at least Western countries, it's obvious that the top value we have is productivity. Why would we need things like fast food if something wasn't more important than food? Why would we need 5 days a week for work if relaxation was more important, right? You can start to see these things through the actions that people take and how the world is set up. And when we look at the fact that most people are running from their issues, right? In order to run from your issues, you need to stay going. And so that's why a lot of people also can't relax. They don't even know what to do if they have a day to themselves, right? They try to fill it in with things to do. And I've been guilty of this many times in my life, right? And at the same time, we know that in order for muscles to grow, they need rest. In order for land to be really bountiful and really healthy, it needs rest. Why wouldn't then we fit into that same category? Even though so many of us pride ourselves on how much we do, how much we produce, how productive we are, right? And when you look at people like David Goggins or any of these individuals, they kind of glorify that, right? No, I suffer to suffer. I need to suffer all the time. I need to, really push myself. And I'm not going to say that's bad. I'm just going to say that it's not my flavor of ice cream, because I realize that can get really shadowy very quick. And personally, I've never met anyone that's living that type of lifestyle that I would see as fulfilled, truly happy, or truly full of joy. And I'm curious if you've seen a similar type of pattern in your life. What is up, everybody? I hope you were enjoying this week's episode. I wanted to take your ear for a quick second here to let you know about our Black Friday deals on our courses that we currently have. So right now, you can get the Clarity with Cannabis course and break your dependency with cannabis without having to quit in as little as 30 days for only $49, which is a $48 savings from our normal $97 price. Also, for those of you that may want to start growing, we have the Grow with Cannabis course on sale for $333 right now, which is over $100 in savings. So to find out more info and grab the courses while they're on sale, head down to the show notes. Make sure you check out the coupon codes as well and use that at checkout. And I hope you guys have the best day ever. Now back to the show.
Yeah, again, like you, I won't say it's bad, but I will say this: it's freaking bizarre. And as I say that, I'll own my bias, right? I own my bias in the sense that I recognize the lifestyle that I live is drastically different than 99.98% of fellow Americans or Westerners, even. You know, so to me, it's bizarre because I'm a farmer. I'm a regenerative farmer, and as you can see, we live on the land. We live with the land, is a more accurate way to say it. So to me, it's just a very unnatural. I don't understand that world on the other side of the gate. If I'm being frank, I don't understand it, and only a very small part of me even cares to try to understand it. I want to understand it just enough so that I can understand my role in helping. But frankly, it makes me dizzy to try to understand that lifestyle, because all of these huge questions that come out of it all goes back to the root of, yeah, of course it's screwed up. Look at, you're living a completely unnatural life. We live in a culture where most people, the vast majority, well over 90% of people, are multiple generations from growing food. Like I can't wrap my head around such a strange and bizarre thing. The majority of people don't understand where your food comes from. I mean, I don't know where to have a deep conversation when the starting place is something so basic as, we don't know where, I don't understand what happens out there. It makes no sense to me. And so, yeah, there's all kinds of crazy things that stem from it, right? Of course, there's going to be weird things that come off the branches when the roots are so messed up. We are human beings. It's a sacred role. And our sacred place in that hoop is not living separate from the land, where all of these essentials for living and breathing and bodily functions come from some industrialized process. The reason that's important is because of how we learn. The greatest, most holy scriptures that have ever been written were creation. You know, this behind me, that's the holiest scripture that's ever been written. And when I'm connected with it and I work with it, I observe. It's a natural thing that happens. I don't have to focus on it. I don't have to intentionally do it. It's just by default. When I'm working this land, I observe the land. And as I observe the land, I learn natural law. And when I learn natural law, I learn how I operate. I learn how I heal. I learn how I learn and evolve. All of these deep questions that come up in the human experience, there's a blueprint for it. We just have to observe it. And I don't believe that can be observed I don't believe that can be observed in periods of vacation or, the also popular retreat space. You know, for instance, I know absolutely nothing about Boston culture. And I'm not going to learn anything about Boston culture by going there for the weekend. You know, I would have no way of doing that. I would get this small glimpse, right? And then that would then be in my mind what Boston culture was about. And anyone from there would laugh at my crazy notions of what I would then believe Boston culture to be. Well, nature's the same way. You know, to know something is to be intimate with something. Intimacy involves time and devotion.
Dude, 100%, man. I could not have said that better myself. And it's funny when you were talking about Boston culture, because if you came here for 2 days, you'd probably think that Boston is just a series of clam chowder and sports, which isn't inaccurate. It's just it's not the whole picture, right? Like there's so much stuff that goes on here
Exactly.
And so much hilariousness. Boston's a funny place for sure. I mean, I've traveled a good amount at this point to places over and over again where I've got like a good taste for months at a time of being there. And it's definitely made me grateful to live where I live just because it's a very silly place, but you really wouldn't get that. You'd actually probably have the opposite if you came for 2 days. You'd be like, wow, everyone there's a dickhead, but what you don't understand is that and you get it. I mean, you're on the eastern side of the country. My kind of differentiation between the West and East Coast that I heard that I really enjoyed. And again, this is a generalization for anyone listening. Of course, it's not 100% accurate, but it's a funny thing. So just go with it. So, the whole idea of the East Coast being more kind and the West Coast being more nice is how I kind of see the two juxtapositions of East and West, where the East Coast, let's say that you pop a tire on the side of the road, someone might pull over and be like, what are you, a fucking dickhead changing that yourself? Let me give you a hand, right? And they'll actually get out of your car and help you. Whereas on the West Coast, if you're changing your tire, someone may pull over and say, oh my goodness, that sucks, you popped your tire. I wish you the best of luck. And they'll drive off, So it's a different type of energy, And again, you'd only really understand that if you were here long enough to realize like, yeah, people are going to fuck with you here, but they're also the people that will have your back no matter what. Whereas again, I've never lived on the West Coast, so I'm not going to say that the other side is whatever. But as I've shared that with different people, they've found comedy in it, right? So maybe it's accurate in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it's not, but it's funny to me, And it's really good, dude. Funny stuff. Well, I'm curious for you, man. I have a question for you of something we talked a little bit beforehand that I'd love to kind of like throw out there. One of the things that I get asked on a lot from people that are looking to grow cannabis is, what genetics should I go out and purchase, right? What should I go buy? What should I look for? And I know you have a very specific view on let's say, the over-commercialization of cannabis genetics and things of that nature. I mean, there's many more ways we could describe what's going on, but, I'm curious for you. First of all, I'd like to hear your theory or your viewpoint on cannabis genetics and where we're at right now in the world. And you can take this any way you want. You can take it in terms of the consumerism / capitalist point of it. You could also take it from the line of landrace genetics being all but gone away, basically because of this modern hybridization. And then I'd also like to hear about if someone listening to the show is like, hey, I don't have a connection like Ryan or JR. I can't necessarily go out and find genetics the old fashioned way and have someone give me a solid handshake with a pile of seeds in them. If I can't find that type of connection in the world, how would I go about finding genetics that are truly high quality and are worth purchasing from people that are doing something that is on the right side of history? Like, what are the thoughts that come into your mind or heart around those questions? First of all, your own viewpoint on it, and then what people can do that maybe don't have connections like we do to find really high quality genetics without having to pay an arm and a leg for them. What is up, family? I wanted to take a second while you're tuning in to tell you about an amazing new product I recently began using. Now, you guys know I do ads very rarely, and my promise to you is that anything I speak about is something I personally have found value in using regularly. Well, recently, I came across a company called Brain Supreme, who sells microdoses of mushrooms mixed with adaptogens, nootropics, and other additions as well. And even though I've microdosed off and on for years, I have never felt results like these. In only 2 weeks, I'm sleeping better, I have far less mind chatter. My ability to perform has exponentially improved, and best of all, the sense of inner peace I've been feeling is like nothing I've ever experienced in microdosing before. Right now, you can get 15% off of any of their products when you use code SPRAGUE15 at checkout. And to find out more about them and grab some for yourself, head down to the show notes for this episode and begin your journey into microdosing today. Now back to the show.
Well, my future ambitions of being the mayor of Cannatown are going to be wrecked when I answer this. Uh, so, I'm definitely not going to win friends in the industry with some of the opinions here. So, but I'm going to let it fly anyway. You know,
Yeah, dude, let it rip.
cannabis genetics have an incredibly cool history up to a certain point, and then things get pretty weird. But there's always been some folks, holding it down. There was essentially, we got to begin at the beginning of the modern era. There were, less than a half dozen original Johnny Appleseeds that, most of them left the West Coast at some point, in the late 60s, early 70s. They all had a similar, story of their backpack around the world, picking up landrace genetics in Pakistan and Afghanistan and Asia and Central America and Northern Colombia and all of these places. And then they landed back on the West Coast, specifically, Northern California was where most all of it went down. And then, modern hybridization happened, and it was amazing. Fast forward 50 some odd years from that point, and it's become not only commercialized, I think the more accurate word is egotized, right? A lot of breeding has turned into this, a lot of cannabis in general has turned into this competition of this is better. And it's this weird, just strange, bizarre flexing that I can't wrap my head around. I don't enjoy it, and I try to steer away from it. But also in the middle there was Amsterdam. Amsterdam was a safe place to have some genetics, and so a lot of stuff got stored there from folks on the West Coast that were breeders. But then some weird stuff happened in Amsterdam, and I'm going to get a whole lot of rocks thrown at me for this statement. But Amsterdam didn't do a whole lot to help, in my opinion. Amsterdam didn't have the ability, didn't have the space to do proper pheno hunts and to do proper breeding. So you end up with white rhino and everything. No different than, nowadays you end up with a handful of strains and everything because there's not the proper space. For a real pheno hunt, you've got to be growing on a commercial level. You can't, it's really hard to pheno hunt 5 plants. You're depending on some natural lottery to be able to do that, right? Because in an original, F1 cross, there's no telling how many dozens, if not hundreds, of variations are going to be expressed in that seed. And so if I only pick 4 of those seeds to pop, I am literally just playing a natural lottery. And now, don't get me wrong, some amazing things can and have happened with that genetic lottery. But when we talk about it from a breeding perspective, right? From a breeding perspective, I want to be choosing certain selections because of certain qualities, and that takes a certain quantity to be able to do. And the challenge with the Amsterdam era, it was all inside on a fairly small scale, right? Like nobody was blowing up 200 light grows in Amsterdam in the 80s and 90s, At best, there might have been, 10, 12 lighters, which is still, hard to be able to do a real pheno hunt in. And so I think I have the strong opinion and I own my bias. Having come up in this thing on the West Coast, I know I have a West Coast bias, but I think when we're having the genetic conversation, I don't think we can quantify the huge beneficial influence that the original, big commercial farmers of Northern California and Southern Oregon did for all of us. So there's my preface on how we got here. Now, to answer your question, if someone's out there and their question is, hey, what genetics do I run and how do I get them? There are a handful of excellent, amazing breeders out there currently. And most of them you can find on Instagram. Here's what I would tell you to look for to know which ones are going to have real quality. If you don't see a giant garden that they're running, they're probably not going to have the ability to do what I just described. You know, some of my favorite breeders out there, they have large gardens, they have families with large gardens, they have a circle of friends with large gardens, all in this, general area that they're in, and you can see them doing their pheno hunts and selections out of more than, a half dozen or a dozen plants. Now, don't get me wrong. Again, I just want to make sure I'm clear. Some great things can happen. I can luckily get one really great male and with luck get one really great female, and I can cross them and with some luck have an amazing outcome. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. What I'm saying is mathematically that's clearly not reliable. So I would look for those things specifically. I would also encourage everyone not to sell yourself short on the great ganja adventure. And that is, go to these places yourself. You're going to find seed swaps. There is a whole generation of folks like me that have the opinion that, seeds are to be shared, and swapped and traded. That is not necessarily the space to build a business around, but not saying that there's not some good folks that have done that and do that. But generally speaking, that was kind of the culture I came up around was, seeds are for trading, packs are for selling. So, that was the culture I came up around. And I own my bias. And so I would encourage people to look on Instagram, find those folks, but like, dude, you want to talk about an epic road trip? Like, go into, ganja country, which is a lot of different places these days, and drive around, meet some folks, see who you vibe with, because there's some characters on all ends of the spectrum and involved in cannabis, right? Some of the greatest people you'll ever meet, some of the most egotistical, some of the most down to earth, some of the most wackadoodle, all of the ranges of the human experience. You're going to find those extremities, and that's fun, so go to those places, go to your local dead cover band show in the Emerald Triangle, or southeastern Oklahoma or something, and go out in the smoking section during set break and make some friends and see what comes of it. Go to the farmers market, because a lot of us will be there too. Go to the places that you would find the people you'd vibe with in those regions that are known for cannabis production, and make an adventure out of it. I think we live in a world where we sometimes think everything has to be ordered from the internet, and that those conveniences are great. But let's not sell ourselves short on the cool adventure that could be had there too, right? Of going someplace like this and meeting people face to face and seeing what shakes up, because there are plenty of people out there like me that when I meet good people, I want to support them. There's a reason I will continually jump on a podcast with Ryan, because I firmly believe in what Ryan's doing. And if Ryan says, hey, bro, you got some dank genetics, I'm going to, you bet your ass, I'm going to be like, yeah, man, here, try some of these out, because of your approach, right? We're going to vibe. Now, on the same token, if somebody comes at me with a completely different vibe and I can see that some other mask is being worn, you can also bet your ass that I'm going to let them know, yeah, I don't know. Don't know the guy. Don't have any. Sorry. Good luck. And I think that is part of the natural role of stewardship that comes with working with plant medicines. And I greatly appreciate that and think it has a place of great value in a culture that has very rapidly turned into giant egos and money being at the forefront. And that's just not, I don't get down like that.
Yeah. I mean, dude, I totally agree. You know, it's interesting to me how many big egos are in the cannabis space, considering the fact that cannabis is a plant medicine, even though most people that would fit into this category don't see it as such. I mean, hell, the industry as a whole doesn't really see it as a plant medicine. They just see it as like getting high or a commodity or, you know, something of that nature. And, you know, again, like one of the things that I love to teach people is what real cannabis culture truly is, which is all about sharing, coming together, connection. Like connection is to me the foundational level of what cannabis culture truly is. And so when you're talking about like, hey, go to the farmers markets, you know, go to a cool place, right? Like meet some people, you know, like what are we really saying here? Hey, be a human being. Go find other human beings.
Right.
Go find things that you enjoy, right? These are like base level things in reality that may seem very far-fetched to people today because of how far off the beaten path we've gotten when it comes to what true human nature really is. You know, even if it was heirloom tomato seeds we were talking about, right? It'd be the same conversation. It's not just because it's cannabis that we're having this conversation, right? It's that people aren't going out and connecting with their neighbors, with their towns, with places they want to go visit. You know, why would I need to go to Thailand? I can go online and look at a travel video of someone going to Thailand, right? It's like, that's not going to give you the direct experience of it. The same way that when you look at the educational system, how many people have PhDs and as a result, they think they actually know said thing, but they're missing out on the direct experience of it, right? You know how many therapists and counselors and, you know, these types of people try to tell me about psychedelics? And then I ask them, oh, how many times have you done psychedelics? And they're like, well, I've never done it. I'm like, well, then what makes you think you have the right to try to tell me, someone who's had a direct experience of something you've never had the direct experience of, right? It's a thirst trap. It ends up making people think they know things because we're taking in more intellectual information. But in reality, you know, like Paul Chek always says, what does PhD stand for? Piled higher and deeper into someone else's world, right? The only way to really know what an apple is to eat the fucking apple. You can go learn about pectin. You can learn about the varieties. You can even learn about the type of soil they grow in, right? The different types of varieties that grow well together. But none of that is going to teach you what an apple is better than just going out into the field, picking one and eating it, you know? And what I always say is that it's kind of backwards, right? Like if I go out into the field and I find an apple and I like really love that experience, well, yeah, now I might want to go learn about pectin and all these other things, right? But it's almost like people reversed it, you know? Like they're not going from the direct experience, initiating them into wanting to learn more about something. They're learning about something and actually omitting the direct experience as a result of having intellectual knowledge around it. And so when it comes to cannabis culture and all the things we're talking about, that is happening so often, right? Not only on the side of people that don't use cannabis, that are trying to tell people that use cannabis what cannabis is like. We know that happens, but even in the industry, right? Like, oh, why would I go to that place? You know, I can get gelato seeds down the street, right? It's like, well, why are you going for gelato seeds, let's say? And I'm not dissing gelato. I talk about gelato a lot. I'm not dissing gelato. But at the end of the day, it's that like most people are going after metrics like how high the THC is and all these things they think really matter. But it was funny because when I worked at the dispensary, we had a strain there, Sunset Sherbet, which was big news in like 2016. And people fucking loved it, right? But what they didn't realize was that it was only 13% Delta 9 THC or THCA. And so it was very interesting when I would tell people that because they're like, no, it's got to be higher than that. No, like I got ripped off that. And I'm like, no, there's a lot more components to cannabis that you won't know if you're going to buy the same genetics, the same flower in stores and whatever as everyone else is buying. You know, again, cannabis genetic creation is an art form, just like any other type of art. And the second it starts getting modernized and commercialized, it starts losing a lot of its uniqueness. And that's my gripe with cannabis genetics today is that, sell them, do whatever the hell you want, but don't make it all just cookie cutter, And I didn't even mean to throw in the cookies thing there because everything's across of cookies these days. But, and again, I'm not dissing cookies. That was a cool variety that someone made. But why does everything now have to be crossed with it, right? Why are we so obsessed with these certain things? And I think the challenge is, it's multifaceted, obviously, but most people don't even know about this stuff. So they have no context for the fact that them going to a dispensary and asking for the highest percent is not really the only thing they can do. So I think it's like a re-education around, this entire subject. But I'm with you, JR. I think the best part of life is adventure. And I think that term is something that adults forget very often. They might know travel. They might know visiting different places, but do they know the term adventure still? And do they still have an adventurous spirit? And that was one of the things, and debating what you may think about Greenhouse Seeds and whatever, because I know they're a bigger company, but their Strain Hunter show was such a cool thing for me to watch as a kid, because here are these people that, again, may be going out and giving hybridized seeds to indigenous cultures. And that part I was a little weird about, but they're actually going out there and they're trying to find these long lost genetics, and I think there's a lot of ability for all of us to do something similar, maybe not give all these indigenous elders, Girl Scout cookie seeds, because that's going to then start messing with the entire landrace genetic collection they have. But, tomato, it's just not my taste. But, again, being able to adventure just overall is so important, let alone in the microcosm it is for cannabis genetics, and I think that's one thing that humanity has started to forget in a big way.
Man, there is so much gold that you just laid out right there, brother. Holy smoke. On the cannabis level, yeah, you're 100% right. It happened in the late 80s, early 90s when Amsterdam went to all the traditional spots and did the same thing. And these were well-intentioned, folks, very well-intentioned. They were just sharing something that they really enjoyed with someone that they really respected. Unintentionally, what happened is, that landrace cultivar now 20 years later is gone, and it's that landrace cultivar, crossed with some white rhino. And so that happens. Who's to say in the grand scheme of time, maybe that was the right move. I don't know. But it is an interesting thing to ponder. But I think the key point that I heard you say in all of that gold there came down to connection. The best way to get to know, an apple is to taste an apple, not read about it. And, that plays such a huge part in modern day cannabis that I don't think it can be understated. I'm going to share some personal observation statistics that I don't think most people would be aware of. And again, I haven't done a peer-reviewed study on this, so take it for what it's worth. This is just my observation over the course of 26 years in commercial cannabis. The vast majority, I would bet at least 90% of the modern American cannabis industry has not only never touched a psychedelic, but they're fucking terrified of it. These are not people that would sit with plant medicine. They're people that want to pop dub in the club and, flex about how much money they got. This is not folks that want to sit with medicine and stare shadows in the eyes. These are folks that sell shadows for everyone else to put on. And those are drastically different energies. And it's had an unquantifiable effect on not only the cannabis culture, but on cannabis as a medicine. If your sacred medicine is being defiled before it comes to you, is it still sacred? I don't know. I'm putting it out there as a question. There is an undeniable influence of those types of energies around this amazing plant, and it has some effect. I won't sit here and attempt to quantify it, but it has some effect, and I would personally believe that it's drastic. I would go even further and say, depending on where you're at in the country, but if you took the country as an average, I bet there's pushing 50% of the cannabis industry that doesn't even consume cannabis in any kind of way. Out of the 50% that does, I bet 40% of them smokes like an alcoholic. Those are my observations.
Yeah.
Take those three pieces there, put it together, and tell me what you come up with on your Venn diagram. And I think it perfectly explains what's going on with cannabis culture and cannabis as a medicine in our culture. And how do we fix it? You know, people have to have a desire to want to heal before they heal. And that usually takes pain and struggle to have that true desire. And you have to have a true desire to truly jump into the abyss, because the abyss is terrifying. And anyone that tells you it isn't has never looked at it. And to willingly choose to jump into that abyss, it takes devotion. It takes a great deal of care and integrity, and a lot of times that comes up, like a splinter coming out, right? Of, I have to do something about this. This has to change, right? And that becomes this driving force of, because I want that change, I am willing to do what is necessary to truly understand it and heal it. And just like that splinter coming up, a lot of times we've got that splinter pussing up, and you've got to dig in there and stab it a little bit to get it out. You got to cause it hurts a little bit to remove it. And I would say that the true healing process is very much similar to that, especially when working with medicines. It's not all sunshine and unicorns. We have to be willing to go to those dark and scary places and shine some light there, or at least look them in the eye and let them know that it's okay for light to shine there. And that's all of those things play a huge factor on this amazing plant of cannabis. And I think the more awareness we bring to it, like you're doing with your awesome platform, and just who you are as a human being, brother, I think is having a greater impact than 1,000 breeders could ever have. Because, genetics are one thing, but that genetic expression, for that healing to come through, it needs a sacred place. Well, you can take the greatest cannabis in the world and put it in the wrong setting, and it's no longer healing. So what then becomes the most important factor is absolutely the reverence, the space, how we approach it, our intention. That's hands down the most important factor. And it's the most important factor from the seed to the joint and all things in between, how we approach it.
100%. And you said a lot of gold in there too that I want to talk about. And think of it this way, right? If we go on the basis of what Hermetics talks about and whatnot, is how we do anything is how we do everything, or as within, so without. So if we think about this, right? If we asked 10 people, do you think it matters what kind of household a child grows up in terms of how they show up in the world thereafter? I bet all 10 would say yes. They might have different answers of how much it matters, why it matters, things like that. But I guarantee they're going to all agree that the household and environment of a child really impacts that child's ability to thrive or merely just survive as they get into adulthood. So if we think about just that, right? And now we think about, let's say, pets. Pit bulls, for instance, are talked about often. Oh my goodness, pit bulls are dangerous dogs. Are they? Or do dangerous people happen to buy pit bulls often and do dangerous things with them, right? It's like we have to trace it back to figure out where these things start. So if we look at life and we start to see that even an apple tree, right? Or, an apple tree, let's say, for instance, if you grow an apple tree in a terrible place with all sand, you try to grow it in the desert, probably not going to be that successful, no matter how amazing the genetics are, no matter how much you paid for the seeds, no matter how much you're out there trying to water it every day. If the environment is not right, something messy is going to occur. So now when we look at cannabis, it's pretty funny how for the first couple of years that I was out there saying, hey, the energy of the grower really matters in the context of that final medicine, people would be like, that's woo-woo. That doesn't make sense. And again, this is a perfect example of how a lot of people have been piled higher and deeper with intellectual knowledge that is not based on the natural laws of the universe. They don't even know that natural laws of the universe occur or are real. They'd probably call that woo-woo as well. And so the challenge I have sometimes is that when I'm speaking those things, there's a very small subset of the population that will actually be able to feel intuitively how that is accurate. And again, it's not rocket science, right? If we understand that kids take in a good environment, plants take a good environment, pets take a good environment, relationships take a good environment, food takes a good environment, all these things take good environments. Why all of a sudden is cannabis just somehow inert to that? Last I checked, cannabis is a living being, just like any other plant, just like anything in this world, because everything has consciousness to it. So it's been actually really interesting and kind of comical to me how it's taken about 2 or 3 years of me sharing this stuff and kind of like being on this hill for people to start really realizing it. Not you, of course. I mean, you've got this for a lot longer than I've been alive, but like, you know, again, like a lot of people now are reaching out saying, oh my God, I'm starting to get this. And I think that's happening as the collective wakes up more, whatever that terminology actually, you know, resonates with in terms of each individual. But I think as people start really like slowing down enough to actually realize that there are natural laws here and that if you disobey them, you're going to have a negative outcome. And if you obey them, on the other hand, you get positive outcome. Perfect example to this is you want nature to support you. Cool. What are you doing to support nature? Do you pick up trash around your area when you're out walking? If you aren't, then how do you expect nature to take care of you? Not because it's tit for tat, but it's because you get out what you put into things, right? And again, if we think about also the layer of belief and how belief is a gigantic part, I mean, maybe the biggest part of the human experience. For instance, right? If I believe that I am good enough, I am going to be able to take risks that someone else who has all the resources in the world but doesn't feel they're good enough are not going to feel worthy to take. Nothing is different. Let's say we have the same resources, we grew up in similar environments, whatever, but if they somehow have this belief system that they're not enough, their life experience is going to be drastically different to the one I have believing that I am enough. So if we understand that and then we juxtapose that onto the belief systems most people have around cannabis, and then we look at where those belief systems come from, which is typically rap music, Cheech and Chong. And again, I'm friends with Chong. I'm no diss on him. But again, this paints a very specific picture of cannabis. You look at Pineapple Express, Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, all these depictions of cannabis. And what is it? The thing that's going to get you arrested, the thing that's dumb as hell, and the thing that has no other use except just getting high and eating Cheetos. So you think those belief systems aren't impacting the experience of the people that have taken that information in and are unconsciously believing those things. That's why I tell everyone, you know, when people reach out to me and say, cannabis isn't a psychedelic, I've been smoking for XYZ amount of years and I've never done anything like that. This is false news, right? I'm like, okay, cool. Well, have you looked into your belief systems around cannabis? Because if you haven't, I don't even know why we're talking yet, right? Like these are very high level things that only certain people will understand. Because if you don't even understand belief, there's only a certain type of person that would even be able to listen to this podcast, for instance, right? Because there's so much foundational stuff that you'd have to understand. First of all, you're an infinite being. First of all, you are the dreamer dreaming this entire world into reality, which is not truly reality, but is an illusion. And that this entire world is really a conspiracy theory in ways of the ego to conspire to pull you away from God and your mission. So should you choose to accept it, is to stop giving the ego power and start siding with the higher self of the Holy Spirit. If you don't understand any of that, and then you start talking about how the environment that cannabis is grown in really matters in terms of the final product, someone's not even going to register how that makes sense. And so again, like what we're dealing with here is the fact that a lot of people that are utilizing a plant medicine, because that's what cannabis is, just like I talk about all the time, and just like JR is talking about, these are not for beginners. And I don't say that in a judgmental way. I say that as someone who also got started in these when I was a beginner and had some very challenging experiences happen as a result. Now, were those things good in the sequence of my life? Yes, I was able to work through them. I was able to get the message in regards to what we're talking about here. And I was able to make wiser and more discerning choices moving forward. But I will tell you, and again, you know, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I do not think most people that are beginners happen to go through that type of stuff. You know, I think most of them, because I work with them every single day, are stuck. They don't know who they are, where they come from, where they're going, why they're here, what their purpose is. They don't have any context for anything. And now they're utilizing a plant medicine with a bunch of unconscious beliefs that they don't realize even exist. They don't even realize they have an unconscious. And then what happens is they maybe have a challenging experience. They do something stupid. They get in the car or whatever. And now cannabis is getting the blame for it, right? And that shows the whole idea of humanity not wanting to own up for their own challenges, right? Not wanting to own their own shadow, wanting to put the blame out there where no power exists, instead of putting it in here that, yes, will sting, and that's what it's meant to do. Because pain is a teacher. And until you actually get the lessons it's trying to teach you, you will keep falling into pain and you will think you're a victim of it. And when you think you're a victim, you are powerless, and boom, you have created the perfect breeding ground for the ego to be the entirety of your reality. And now you have bought into the conspiracy theory of all of this being real, and you are getting farther and farther away from reality. Then, as you start to have psychedelic experiences, you're going to have monumentally challenging experiences because it's going to challenge every single thing you've come to believe about reality. And people wonder why people have challenging experiences with psychedelics. It's because they don't have a foundation of the creation story of what we're doing here. They're not connected to the land. And again, I'm not saying this the same way you are as a judgmental way, where we're not talking judgmentally. We're just talking about like, hey, we're sick of the cannabis plant and other psychedelics and nature getting the blame for human beings' shitty, uninformed actions. And if we want to stop that, we kind of have to sting them where it hurts, which is, hey, turn the mirror around. There's no one else to blame. This plant didn't hold a gun to your head. Mushrooms didn't force you to connect with them. You made decisions, and until you own those decisions, you're never going to be a grown-up. No matter how old you seem in a human body, that really isn't even real.
Man,
So,
you're so right. I think that a lot of times we pay attention to the extremities, right? It's human nature. I think that's a good thing in a lot of cases. But in this case, when you're specifically talking about, learning and gaining wisdom through the psychedelic experience, whether it's with cannabis or other plant medicines, we a lot of times focus on those extremities. One being what you just described, right? Of this classic, what we will uncomfortably call a bad trip, which was really just something we didn't want to look at and process. And then we look at the other extremity that I would say is I had a great time. It was highly entertaining. I would put those in the same bucket. One comes from a place of unwillingness, and one comes from a place of lack of awareness. You're not going to find something you're not looking for. If your perspective and your worldview is that all of this is just here to entertain me, then that's what it's going to do. Watch the world sing and dance with absolutely no meaning. And I would describe that as hell. That sounds very hellish to me. On the other hand, these experiences of, I had this rough time when I ate a, high dose edible or some mushrooms or whatever. We need to look at those honestly. And I know I have deep empathy for how difficult that is. I know it's difficult. But if we get honest with ourselves, we'll see that this wasn't some bad trip. This was something came up at the beginning of where it turned, right, that we didn't want to look at. And then as we curled in a ball in the corner and this thing didn't go away, it became rough. So what's the answer to that not happening? Don't curl in a ball and turn your head. Accept your own folly as a human. It's okay. And we've been sold this idea of perfection to our great detriment. I believe if we take any figure from theology or dogmatic figure and we take that term perfect, we should erase our idea of what that means and instead insert perfectly devoted. That's the same energy we want to approach these things with, right? Of course, I cannot be responsible for doing something correctly that I didn't know how to do. That's a silly notion. So pour some grace on yourself. Now, after we know how to do it, I can, afford to give myself a little bit more stern talking to of, well, I knew better and I did it anyway. Okay, well, go ahead and take your whippings for that one because you earned it. But forgive yourself and do better. But a lot of times these bad trip experiences are before we really know better. And we need to look at that word know. To know something has absolutely almost nothing to do with intellect, even though that's how our culture looks at it. To know something is to experience something. And that is a seven chakra, 360-degree, experience. I can't experience something just by touch, right? I can't experience something just by reading about it. It's this full experience of intellectual. This is the union of, the mind and the heart that the mystics talk about, right? Is so it takes that rough experience to truly know. So it's okay. Don't beat yourself up from not wanting to look at it the first time or the second time or the 50th time. It doesn't matter how deep down that road of running from it we are. At any given moment, we can choose to just stand, accept our humanity, and look this thing in the eye, whatever we want to call it, right? That part of us we don't want to look at, demons, right? Shadows, uncomfortable, whatever you want to label it as. A lot of times, all we have to do to make the boogeyman go away is look at the boogeyman. We don't have to fight him. We don't have to pull some superhuman miracle, and there doesn't have to be some magic. Magic is another word for courage, I believe. And all we really have to do is look, stand firmly in your accepted humanness and just be there, present, and watch how the shadows transform.
Dude, absolutely agreed. And, what it brought up for me too when you were talking is the idea that, again, like what you start realizing in these quote unquote bad or challenging experiences that you can have with psychedelics is that, at least in my case, what I've noticed, I'm curious if this resonates with you or for anyone listening, I'd be curious to hear if it resonates with you guys too when I send out the email. But, again, like this whole idea of a bad trip implies that you're meeting a part of you, quote unquote, that maybe you don't want to face or something like that. But typically in my experience, when I, when I meet these parts, during the experience is challenging because there's a part of me that believes that really is me. And so that's the challenge, right? The challenge is that I believe it's me. It's not that I saw it, right? If I see something in a psychedelic experience that I don't feel relates to me, it's not scary, right? It has no context or relevance to me. But it's the belief behind whatever you're seeing being very scary or being a part of you that I found really leads to the challenge. And again, like while you're going through it, it's kind of hard to remember this, but when I come out of it, every time I have a challenging experience, it reminds me a little bit quicker, like, oh, I just met some of the anti-me, some of the stuff that wasn't really me that I picked up along the way, that I'm now like where it feels challenging, what I think it feels challenging around is that this part is me and I don't want to face it. But what the real thing is I found is that no, my soul or my higher self or whatever omniscient power within and without us is leading me to see something that I believe is part of me to ultimately transcend and realize it was never part of me to begin with, and that it was just me versus the anti-me. And that's really what it is. And I think that the more that we face those things, the more that we can transcend them, transmute them, and come back to what we truly are, which is infinite beings that have never been born, will never die. And that what we're in right now is an experience. It's a dream, right? And at the same time, that doesn't mean it's useless or it's not, it's not real or nihilism or any of that. It means, no, have the best dream possible. And how you have the best dream possible is you pick your beliefs very wisely. And also, you understand that part of the human experience is sometimes you pick stuff up without realizing it. So you have these things like psychedelics along the way that you can connect with in an intentional way to be like, I don't know if I really know what's at the brunt of my anxiety or depression or whatever. It's not in my conscious mind, but obviously something's going on. I know I don't just have a Zoloft deficiency here, So let me go behind the veil, so to speak, and figure out what may be unconsciously at work here so I can gain clarity on it. And what I always tell everyone is remember how you felt before you took the psychedelic. Because before you take the psychedelic, you're usually very confident, very courageous. And then, of course, you're expecting a challenge may arise. But when the challenge arises, the ego plays a lot of tricks of like, it shouldn't be happening like this. This isn't supposed to happen. And so now you're in woulda, coulda, shoulda land, right? Which is not reality. And so just pattern interrupting yourself and reminding yourself like, no, I chose to take this medicine intentionally and responsibly because I thought I was going to meet this. So congratulations. I'm now meeting it. Okay. Let me work through that. Let me breathe through it. Let me remind myself that I am loved. Let me remind myself that I am worthy no matter what I believe is inside of me and all of these kind of things we talk about. And if you can do that, you come out the other side having a really big weight lifted off your shoulders because you've realized another whole way that you've thirst trapped yourself into thinking you're bad, not worthy, not enough, whatever, when in reality, it was just something that was specifically crafted for you to overcome it. So then hopefully you can go share that with other people, share your experience and inspire them to go on the hero's journey with or without psychedelics to make themselves more them and less anti-them.
That's beautiful. And I think to put an exclamation point on what you just said, all of that suffering that you just described there was centered around one thing, belief, right? It was this ownership over idea, right? I had this expectation. I thought this. What if all of that comes down to belief? So why would I knock on the door of infinite intelligence and show up with a bunch of answers for them? That seems like a very just foolish, reckless, dumb thing to do. If I'm going to knock on the door of infinite intelligence and infinite wisdom and infinite love, then the best thing that I could show up with is empty hands, an empty glass, and the prayer on my heart of, let this be filled. So, I would say there, surrender is the key. And I know that word comes with a weird charge, right? But surrender those beliefs. Don't show up to the door of infinite wisdom and infinite love and tell it what to do. It's silly. Show up empty and repeat that mantra. One of the most fantastic psychedelic experiences I've ever had in my life. Dr. David Hawkins, if you're familiar with him, his first book was Power versus Force. I had just finished reading maybe his second or third book. If a good friend of mine was what I could only describe as a very serious devotee of Dr. Hawkins. There were a lot of people that believed that, Hawkins was a true bodhisattva, and I couldn't find argument with that. There was an amazing amount of understanding and intelligence that he shared. And I had just finished reading, I don't remember if it was second or third book, but in there he said the most powerful prayer we could ever pray is, I surrender all to thee, O Lord. And so I find myself on this beautiful healing retreat that some friends owned, and I had gone around sharing with a bunch of different people in different places on this large community and large piece of land. And the sun was down, and it was dark now. And as the medicine was coming on strong, I laid back on the side of this hill and I stared up at the stars and was taking in this beginning of the force of the medicine really pouring over me strongly. And it wasn't a conscious thought, but I believe, it was maybe karmic destiny. Maybe it was because I just read this book that talked about that. I don't know. Regardless, I remember having the thought of, now seems like a good time to say that prayer. And so I began repeating, I surrender all to thee, Lord. And the first thing I noticed was my preconceived notions of what I was going to experience. I felt that like a heavy jacket being taken off of me. And as I continued to repeat this mantra, it became physical. As I would say it again, I surrender all to thee. All of a sudden, the sensation of the cool grass underneath my hands and on the bottoms of my bare feet, that was gone, and there was no more grass. And as I noticed the cool shadows that the trees were making in the moonlight, all of a sudden, that was gone, and the trees were gone. And as I continue to repeat this mantra of I surrender all, everything in my awareness, I was continually, as the awareness of it and the observation of it all of the its. I would repeat this mantra, and before I knew it, I found myself in a extremely vast, empty of anything space. There was nothing. And the last thought that I had before this beautiful cosmic joke got its punchline delivered was I remember thinking, well, if nothing is here now, then this must be where God is. And it echoed around me. Must be where God is, must be where God is, must be where God is. And all of a sudden, here was this illuminated me looking back at myself. And the tears I wept in that moment, I can't possibly overstate. And what I gleaned from that experience that carried me forward in my human experience in the many years since then is that surrender is such an important key if we want to discover truth. If I have a preconceived notion about who Ryan is, I can never possibly get to know Ryan. It's impossible. And everything is that same way. Does that hold true? If I want to discover truth, then I can't show up at truth's doorstep ready to deliver a message of truth. It doesn't work that way. So I 100% agree with what you were saying there, brother. Surrender certainly appears to be the key to just about every door.
Yeah, dude, exactly what I found too. And I don't pretend to quote unquote know that, but at the same time, that's what seems to work every time until a better kind of theory comes out. That's the best I've gotten so far. And the analogy that came to me too is, it's like if it's 1990 and you go to a Dead show and Jerry's up there noodling around and you think that the best way to hear the music is to get up there and kick him off stage and try to play it yourself, right? Well, then why did you come to a concert, right?
Exactly.
You came there to receive the magic they were giving to you, right?
Exactly.
But if you're like, no, I got some magic too, and you got to get up there and prove your magic, well, then you miss out on all their magic, And who is their magic? It's also your magic. You forget, you miss out on an opportunity to discover more about your own magic by thinking as though you already have magic figured out. That's one of the traps of the ego I found. And I think it's also beautiful, right? Like, in order to figure out what we are, we ultimately, I believe anyway, based on my experience and people I've talked to, we must, quote unquote, get it wrong sometimes, which I don't think is wrong whatsoever. I think it's falling into the traps of the ego, falling into finiteness, falling into lack and scarcity and all of that, that eventually the pain teacher that we talked about before finally goes, hey, brother, how many times you need to visit this before you realize this isn't the answer? And if you can get the message, you can hang up the phone and you can go to the Grateful Dead show and just enjoy being in their magic. Even if that part of you wants you, oh, I could get up there and play and I'm going to kick Jerry off stage. No, you're not. You came there to have the experience, And I think that's really what we're all doing and why, Ram Dass says we're all walking each other home. It makes a lot of sense when you think about it from this context of the fact that we all have unique magic that is all our magic because we're all one being here. Oneness implies nothing elseness, which is one of my favorite statements to say recently. But at the end of the day, because we're in somethingness in this dream here, it takes a lot of deprogramming to reach oneness within somethingness. Because again, it's kind of like, the whole idea of, God, how do I even put this? It's almost like you want to have one foot in the experience and live the best dream and realize that nothing you do matters, but it's very important you do it, right? You play the role. But at the same time, you don't want to forget yourself. Like, okay, here's the analogy I was looking for. I've said this in almost the last 5 episodes. So sorry to the listeners, but not sorry. So if you are a parent and your child is afraid of the boogeyman, the boogeyman's not real, right? But you can't go in there and just be like, shut up, kid, the boogeyman's not real. So you have to a certain degree, play along with this theory this child believes that the boogeyman is real. But if you forget the boogeyman's not real within that, and you get pulled into your son or child or daughter's world of like, oh my God, the boogeyman's real, well, now your kid is going to be terrified because the person meant to protect them has forgotten the fact that they're in like a distortion of sorts, right? This child doesn't know that the boogeyman is not usually someone you find under bed. It's usually the IRS or whatever. But, again, the boogeyman do exist. But, again, it's like if you forget that you're God, right, and that everything is God, it's not a hierarchical thing here, like everything is God. If you forget that, it's really hard to play in the world of somethingness and enjoy it. Because again, like somethingness will never create oneness. It's almost like oneness can create somethingness, but somethingness can't create oneness. So again, if you're coming at this world from an egotistical point of view, aka somethingness, you're going to feel in lack constantly because somethingness can't get you back to oneness. But if you start to forgive and surrender, you start to go closer to oneness. As you go closer to oneness, somethingness becomes a whole different game. It becomes enjoyable. It becomes the game that you are aware you're playing. And you also know that at any point when the game gets challenging, first of all, you remember it's a game. Second of all, you also realize the game's not going to go forever. So even if it's challenging now, it's okay. That's beautiful too. Because I come from a place where there is no game to play, right? It's just oneness. I came down here to have somethingness. And I think being able to remind ourselves of that through experience, through connection, through whatever it may be, plant medicine, whatever, is essential to the human experience. And to bring it all the way back to what we were talking about in the beginning, I think that's one of the main challenges happening in society right now. How we fix it, I don't know. I don't pretend to have the objective answer, but I know that these conversations are a big part of it. I know psychedelics are a big part of it. I know that, coaching and therapy and whatever can be a big part of it. I know any of these things can work, but I think ultimately, however we get from somethingness back to oneness, whatever that is for us, whether it's riding a tractor on a farm and that makes you feel more connected, whether it's playing music live and that makes you feel connected, whatever that thing is, you got to find that thing and you got to put all your focus onto it. Because again, this world is also kind of like we all have dementia of sorts, right? We forget the oneness and we get attached to somethingness. So we need these things in our life that are going to remind us of the oneness of our true nature when we get too stuck in somethingness.
I love it, man. You've got
dude.
me grinning psychedelically over here. It's one of my favorite philosophical and psychedelic loops right there is right. It's nothing you do has any grand consequence in the grand scheme of things. And at the exact same time, every single thing you do has infinitely more impact on the grand scheme of things than you realize. But the mushroom told it to me once in a way that I love saying it's all entirely serious to take too entirely serious.
Yes, dude. Dude, paradoxical truths are my favorite, dude.
Yeah, it's so true. It's incredibly serious, but don't take it too serious. It's a beautiful balance that is one of the great joys I think of being able to be here on this crazy, awesome spaceship called Earth. And it's great to meet fellow awake travelers and share that with in these conversations like you, brother. And one last thing as we wrap this up, because this seems to be a theme in this conversation we've had today. I don't know if this is true outside of North American, Central American, indigenous cultures, but I do know that's true within those cultures that most tribal names, what it means in their language is the real human beings or the true human beings. And how many times has that theme came up in this conversation today, right? And that's
Yeah.
let our tribe be those that are seeking to be the true human beings. Thanks for being a part of that tribe with me, brother.
Dude, thank you, bro. Seriously, like we're all walking each other home. Another way to say that is we're all reminding each other when we fall into somethingness of oneness, And again, like these conversations help me so much. And it's one of the biggest gratitudes I have for being on the path I'm on is that between coaching, podcasting, and whatever, it's almost impossible for me to forget now because if I do, I have multiple reminders each day, speaking to people like yourself, working with clients, hanging out with Rachel or Pierre. It's almost like my higher self has known all along, like this kid's probably going to forget a lot. So let's make sure that he sets his entire life up to be reminders so that no matter where he goes, he's getting reminded, And that's hilarious to me. Like, it's actually funny. It's funny that we're here and that we forget and then we remember and then we forget. And that is what makes us human. And the more that we can connect with each other, the less we forget and the more we remember, man. And that's why one of the millions of reasons I'm so grateful to have you in my life, brother. And this has been an amazing, amazing conversation, dude. Incredible. I just pure flow state. We could have gone for 5 more hours, dude. And I'm so grateful, man. I can't wait for the day we get to meet in person. I get to give you a big old hug and come out to the farm. But dude, remind people where they can find you. If you haven't checked out JR's first episode, everyone listening, highly recommend doing that. This guy is an absolute sage and an absolute gangster. And I'm so proud of him and so grateful to have him in my life. But where can people find you, man? Where they can find out more about Blue Star Farms? If you're in Oklahoma and you're a medical patient, definitely check out Blue Star Farms. But where can they go to connect with you personally, brother?
BlueStarFarms.com is the farm website. At Blue Star Farms Oklahoma is our Instagram, Facebook. Although I admit I go through periods of drought there because I am quite the hermit by nature. My personal email is jr@bluestarag.com. I do soil remediation. I do soil workshops, farming, cultivation workshops. If I can be of any service to those that are on this incredibly important path that we're discussing, I am happy to be of service. Our tribe is small in number but mighty in spirit, and I am completely devoted to being in service of it. So if you find yourself in that tribe and think that I can help, don't be shy. Reach out. Happy to help. I love you and appreciate everything you're doing, Ryan. I believe wholeheartedly in the incredible potency and power of the work and the message that you're doing, and I'm grateful that you're out there sharing it, brother. Thank you.
Thank you, man. And, you know, guys, I'll say once again, just like JR said earlier in the conversation, right? Reach out to him, make a connection, have a conversation with him, right? It's all well and good to listen to this show, and I'm grateful you guys do beyond all measure. And at the same time, this show is not going to get you to know JR like reaching out to JR and talking with him, right? So I really, invite you all, if you're someone who is looking for any support in this space, but especially like he was saying at the end, if you have a farm or you're looking to run workshops or these kind of things, invite him out. Invite me out too. Hell, I'll come out too. We'll have some fun. JR is someone, like I said before, that I'm so grateful to have in my life, and I'm so grateful to be able to share with all of you. And I want you guys to know that wherever you are in the world, whatever you're doing, I hope you're having the best day possible. And as always, I hope the source is with you on this beautiful day. Till next time, journey well. Peace.